This presentation is going to be focusing on the instructional models when we move to a hybrid model. 2 weeks ago at our last board meeting, we spent quite a bit of time reviewing the safety protocols and procedures and the preparation at the site. That information is available on our website and many of the documents that we put out. So you can go to the next slide.
And Dr. Nickerson, are you seeing the right slide presentations?
Yeah,
I mean, are you seeing, you're not seeing you're seeing the right view?
Yeah, it's a single slide.
Okay.
So,
yeah. Okay.
Okay, so the overview is unfortunately, as we all know, the last week there's been a pretty rough change in our public health data. Much of it anticipated, but it's here. So we'll talk a little bit about that and some of the implications. Then we'll spend the majority of the presentation going through our instructional learning models and kind of how we got there in the process and what the hybrid instructional model and the distance or the remote learning model. Then we'll talk a little bit about the process to intent to return to hybrid or remain in distance learning and the commitment for that, and the implementation timeline and some additional considerations that we're in discussion about right now. So you did next slide. So as I think the board is very well aware, and I think the attendees to this meeting are very well aware, there has been a spike or a surge, certainly a surge in COVID cases in the state and in the county. We were trailing a little bit other parts of the state for a variety of reasons that I've even heard kind of pointed at Labor Day, that we didn't have a very active Labor Day here. But regardless, we're there now, and we're in the middle of a pretty substantial surge. 41 of the 57 counties in the state were converted to purple on Monday. Normally the state does their posting on Tuesday. Normally they wait for a county to be at a level of data to be at a level for 2 weeks before they convert, and they made the very aggressive action, which I think is a good public health measure, to try to put the brakes on things before the surge gets completely out of control. For context, first of all, the cases per day and the test positivity rate are the primary indicators to determine what tier we're on. The equity metric was introduced about 3 or 4 weeks ago to make sure that all of our communities in the county are progressing. Another consideration for the tiers that's not in the direct metrics is the state of our healthcare facilities and our hospitals. And I think that was one of the concerns across the state that really drove the quick conversion to purple. Our new cases per day, per 100,000 in the county is at 11 as of today. And for context, 2 weeks ago in the board presentation, we reported it was at 6. Now the adjusted rate is the rate that actually determines what tier you're on. And our adjusted rate is 9. The adjusted rate is determined based on a state index on the amount of testing that's taking place in a county. So obviously a county, if they're testing more, is going to discover more new cases. So they do an adjustment based on that index. And so we're down at 9. All of the counties in the Bay Area, with the exception of San Francisco, San Mateo, and Marin, are in the purple. The threshold to be purple is 7. And again, our adjusted rate is 9. So we are well into the purple. The testing positivity rate is another indicator. Now 3.6 might seem not too bad when you compare it, I think, that South Dakota might have been at about 60% or something like that. But when you're doing a lot of surveillance testing, asymptomatic testing, you really want that number to be down for sure. And for context, 2 weeks ago we were at 2.3. New York City schools just closed all of their schools, 1 million students today, because their testing positivity rate is in the neighborhood of 3. And so that, again, might seem low, but 3.6 is not a real safe number out there when you're doing a lot of testing. Why the increase? I think most of us understand. As the state, or I'm sorry, as the county and neighboring counties loosened restrictions as we moved from purple to red and even orange just a few weeks ago, there's a lot more opportunity for the transmission. We know in terms of schools that when there's high rates of transition, we see schools fail when they open. And so that's why we need to consider that important stat. We also know there's pandemic exhaustion out there. We see it in the behavior of the adults in the community and the students in the community. I think Chaya said it very well in her report a few minutes ago. And we're hearing reports of really risky, unsafe behavior among our students, and we see it with adults in the community as well. And so we know pandemic exhaustion is a big factor. The winter months, there's seems to be more research, according to our public health officials here in Contra Costa County, that the virus does do better in cold weather. But perhaps more importantly, with cold weather, we're all spending much more time inside. All of this as we approach the holidays, and I think there's big concern about what that will do to the levels. You can go next slide, Aida. So this shows a little bit over time. So you can see the surge that's happening, and it looks similar to what happened in the middle of the summer when there was a large surge. The graph, when you're looking at this graph for the county, the way it's done, the lighter blue curve is the true rate of new cases per day per 100,000 in previous 7 days. And the darker blue is the adjusted. So the darker blue is what determines what tier you are. I will note that there is a 10-day lag on this data. I'm sorry, the county, it's a 7-day lag. So the posting of 11/18 is for 11/11 data. The more recent data, the last few days, is in the gray, and that's incomplete data. They're still collecting the data for the recent days, the last 7 days. And so that gray, we would anticipate, will probably increase as it becomes true, and it will be converted to blue as we go forward. Next slide. As a reminder, I know the board's very familiar with this. These are the tiers from the Blueprint for a Safer Economy that was launched at the end of the summer by the state. Purple is the worst level, widespread, and the new case threshold is 7.0. You can see the positivity rate of 8.0. We're not there yet. We're below 4. So that's, again, the good news, even though we've seen that climb. Substantial 4 to 7. As a county, we were briefly in the moderate with our adjusted rate, but that didn't last very long as restrictions were loosened. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, we have 41 counties that are in the purple, and that was a move that the state did on Monday. The Department of Public Health was very concerned about the trends. They saw the data. I will say that San Mateo, their rate or their new case number is very similar to ours, but they have a much bigger adjustment because they do so much testing. The more testing we do in Contra Costa, the more our adjustment will be. So I encourage all listening to do asymptomatic testing. It's good for public health. It also helps our adjustment. So the more testing we do as a county, the better off we are. Next slide. So when you blow up on the state website, you can see what the measurement was. So this was our measurement for Contra Costa County on Monday. And they're doing a 7-day average, but it's from 10 days previously. So it's for quite a ways back. So, you know, we anticipate we'll be purple for several more weeks going forward. Next slide. Now, there's always a lot of questions about, well, in Walla Marinda, here in Walnut Creek, Lafayette, Moraga, Orinda, we're much better. And there is some truth to that, but we have gotten much worse over the last couple of weeks as well. So our 4 main communities, there's been a significant increases in cases. Now the measure is slightly different on this, and it's not a true apples to apples comparison, but if you're looking for the new cases per day per 100,000, you can get a rough estimate of where we would be in the county metrics by taking the number on the far right and dividing by 14. And if you do that, you find that we're not doing so hot in the community. And for example, Lafayette would be in the purple with no adjustment. Moraga actually would be down in the oranger level, but their number is rising. It was just yesterday, it was 23. So it'll be interesting to watch. Orinda would be in the purple, non-adjusted. Walnut Creek would be just on the border of red and purple. And again, these numbers are all rising with the exception of Rinda just from yesterday, but by 5 to 10 points. So that's something that we definitely watch. It's a factor, but there are no walls between communities, as there's no wall between our county and the next county. And we know people move in between, but it is something that we look at. Next slide. So the guidance for schools when you are at purple tier is you cannot reopen for full in-person instruction like in the hybrid model. And you need to be red tier for 2 weeks. Elementary schools can do a waiver, but high schools, there's no waiver opportunity. There is an exception, schools that have already reopened. The primary intent of that is reopened and had partial students in a hybrid model of some sort. We have reopened in some ways. We have student groups, small groups on campus every day. We have our special day classes on our campuses most days. So we have done some reopening, but from the pure Department of Public Health, no. But we're in conversation with the county health services about continuing our small groups that have reopened. And so that's an important consideration. Next slide. So the surge in local public health data, despite that, we feel it's critical to continue planning for a second semester shift to the hybrid and distance learning models. And we'll talk about the why and the timeline for that later. We want to continue with our progression for in-person learning. So our small groups that are happening, our targeted groups, the important interventions that are happening, the important co-curricular opportunities that are happening, the important support for social emotional well-being and mental health that are happening. We want to continue with that within the parameters of public health guidance. And then the timeline to the shift to the new hybrid distance learning model that we'll be sharing tonight and looking for governing board approval. We'll talk about the recommendations of that and the why, but it's with the the red tier that we would like to see that transition. And Aida, I think it's yours moving forward.
Okay, well, thank you. So I'll take over here and talk about the shift and our plan for that we're proposing for the instructional learning models and the recommended timeline. So prior to me getting into that, I just wanted to just shift back a little bit to where we were this summer. Which is we actually had some governing board approved core values that we had presented during the summer and were approved by the governing board when we were presenting the instructional models back in July. And we had two models that we had come to the governing board in distance learning and a hybrid model. And we had certain core values and priorities that we had come to the board with. And these are the priorities and the values that have focused us and that we had maintained throughout this entire process. And that is the focus on student and staff safety, that we want to make sure that regardless of what model we are implementing, that we're always focused on the high quality education and social emotional well-being of our students, that we always have a lens of access and provide access to all of our students, and equity, and that we are providing support and intervention to the students that are not accessing the curriculum, and then we always have the lens of trying to minimize the disruption to our community. So now that we are in a process of revision of how we're moving forward, we needed to kind of regroup ourselves and make sure that we are still keeping those core values and priorities in front of us. So with that, I also want to just briefly remind those that are watching us and the governing board where we were back in October, which is we presented a phase-in plan to our in-person instruction. And we presented that at the October 7th meeting and slightly adjusted it and presented it again at the October 21st governing board meeting. And in preparation for us to return to on-campus, we took some following steps. We surveyed our parents and guardians between October and October 19th, and we needed to determine that initial intent for each child, individual child, if they're going to return when we reopen for the in-person instruction. We also surveyed our staff to determine if there were any potential changes in staffing due to us reopening for in-person. So due to any medical leaves or any other changes in the employment. So based on those initial results, just a reminder that when we initially surveyed our parents, 78%, based on that survey, 78% of our students would be returning to in-person instruction at that time, and 22 would be remaining in distance learning. And then 68% of our survey respondents stated that they would prefer to stay in person to return to in-person instruction at the start of second semester, as opposed to at that time, starting immediately or as soon as possible. And that was a big discussion at the time of can we reopen quickly and do it in October when we went into the red tier, or how much time do we need to shift to that in-person discussion or instruction? And what I don't have on this slide is sort of those limiting factors of why we couldn't shift very quickly. And some of that is the HR piece, which is that last bullet of that HR has to work with individual staff members to determine staffing implications. So based on that survey that we took, Ms. McNamara is having interactive meetings with each staff member to determine change of employment or additional accommodations and what those implications are on our staffing and master schedule. So that's happening right now. We also have to prepare our facilities. Our facilities are being prepared right now. Our classrooms are being ready for hybrid instruction. Our campuses are being painted in a way to direct the different traffic. So we had to prepare our facilities, and those will be ready prior to the winter break. And then we had to get our schedule ready, our master schedule ready, so that our students can actually come back without too much disruption. So that's what we're working on right now so that we can shift quickly into the in-person instruction. And then the last thing that I'll review is what we presented at those two governing board meetings is this quick, this in-person phase-in model. So we started with small group instruction, and we really started with our adult special education classes at the transition program. And then we brought our special day classes at our comprehensive school sites. We continued our after-school sports cohorts, which we're meeting already since the summertime. And then we expanded that to introduce some academic support and some social emotional support through our co-curricular, our extracurricular activities. We started now providing some quiet learning spaces on our campuses. And as you heard from our student reps, a lot of social peer interaction events to have our students come and meet on campus and get to know each other in person and not just on Zoom. And actually, based on that meeting on the 21st, we sort of merged that phase 2 and 3 and started all of that back in October, all in preparation to, in January, come back in-person hybrid. So to rationale, just a reminder, and I think Dr. Nickerson touched on this just a little bit in one of his slides, is why the hybrid model as opposed to the full in-person model, because we still actually get questions about that, is that the Contra Costa County Health Services guidelines state very clearly, and this is a requirement for us, that we must provide 4 to 6 feet of distance between our students in our classrooms and all instructional areas on campus. And our goal is to provide 6 feet of distance. So even if we were shooting for 4 feet of distance, we're shooting for 6, we can only accommodate half of the students on campus at a time. So we cannot put all of our students on campus at one time and satisfy that requirement. So what the hybrid model allows us to do is allows for half of the students to be in person, and while the other half participates remotely, and then they flip-flop on the other days. So that's the rationale for the hybrid, as opposed to bringing all of the students on campus at once, and we get that question a lot. So back during the summer, we had a staff working group that developed a distance learning model and all the guidelines that went with it. And we do hear from our students and our teachers that we have developed a robust distance learning plan that we have been implementing throughout the semester. Well, during that same time, that same group had come up with a hybrid schedule that we had approved back in July, and the guidelines that went with that. That model we were going to start our school year with, and then due to a surge, there were county restrictions placed on schools and we couldn't open in person. So we opened up in our distance learning model. So what we have done now, based on, there were some new legal requirements that have come in September. We have gathered a lot of community and staff input throughout this fall semester. And then we've learned a lot through our lessons from our distance learning implementation. And then we've also reviewed what other schools that have been able to open in hybrid, private and public, throughout California and outside of the state. And we've gathered that input to see how we can revise and improve that hybrid model that was actually approved back in July. And just a quick reminder of what our originally approved model used to be, and I'll just super briefly say it, is that we had originally proposed that we would give 2 instructional models, that there would be an in-person model, which was hybrid, and for those students that could not come back for in-person learning because of their own medical conditions or medical conditions of their family members, that they would be in the remote learning or full distance. For those that could come back into hybrid, that they would be in 2 different cohorts. And then when one cohort is on campus, the other one is in complete asynchronous instruction. So they would have 3 days of asynchronous instruction. Block periods would be 85 minutes. Academy was in person, embedded within the schedule. And then our full distance option at that time was that our students would be taking online coursework, primarily through our partner Fuel Education, which we partner with in our independent study for some of the electives. So back in October, we have come forward. We said that we needed to revise the process for all the things that I just mentioned. So we have had a staff work group engaged in that review and the revision of that approved hybrid and the remote learning schedule. I'm going to use the word remote learning for this so that it's not to be confused with the distance learning that we've been implementing during the fall. We've been meeting over the last 3 weeks. We have about 25 members. They're mainly teachers. We have some counselors in there, librarian, and the administrators. And then through that, we've been using a design thinking process. One of the things that we really wanted to make sure to avoid is that we all come in with solutions right away, because every single one of us has some idea of what we think is a perfect hybrid model. And there really isn't a perfect hybrid model. And there are different districts and different school sites that have landed on some sort of a schedule that may work for them for different reasons. And they landed at it for different reasons. And then we've gotten a lot of input from our families, from our students, and from different staff members of what they think could work for them. So what we wanted to do is really back up and take a very comprehensive process of gathering and examining all the input from surveys and information that we've been gathering from other schools and districts and our own experiences, and then prototyping different types of schedules and then looking at them of what would work for us. We used guiding values that we have developed based on that input. So throughout the design process, after we went through all of the input and through feedback, there was a set of guiding values that we were utilizing to develop those schedules. Some of those things that were guiding us that we wanted to maximize instructional minutes. And when we talk about instructional minutes, we were thinking about those live instructional minutes, live minutes through either in-person or live virtual, so it's via Zoom. But when a teacher and his students are together. We wanted to minimize the disruption to student staff schedule. We heard that repeatedly from our parents and our students that they really didn't want to disrupt their schedule, and we heard that from our staff as well. We really wanted to bring back the value of the academy. Our academy is being utilized in the morning, nowhere nearly robustly as what it used to be in the class when we were in person. We wanted to make sure that we bring back the daily contact with our students that our summer schedule doesn't emphasize enough. We wanted to minimize the time students are spending in asynchronous or independent learning time. We know that time can be really stressful for students and they can have a lot of questions and struggle with it. So we really wanted to shrink that time when they are alone for longer periods of time. We wanted to limit the student and staff exposures. And when I'm talking about exposure, which is COVID-19 exposures. So we wanted to look through the types of schedules that we can limit that time. And then schedule flexibility of when students and staff are absent. We know that there are certain quarantine rules that come with COVID exposures. So if we have a student that needs to be out for 14 days on quarantine or a staff members, how can our schedule allow for some flexibility so that those students are not losing on learning opportunities, or that we're not losing our staff members? We heard a lot of positive input on the late start. We wish we could have started at 9 like all of our students wanted us to, but we wanted to retain some of that late start and not go back to the 8 o'clock. And then implement consistent daily start. We heard from our families that it's really hard if they have multiple children to drop them off if the start of the day is staggered. So we wanted to implement some consistency in the drop-off procedures. And then lastly, provide some flexible spaces on campuses for our students who really need some quiet learning spaces. Not all spaces at home are quiet and without distractions. So we do have quite a few students who would really need that time on campus, or that space on campus where they can learn. So with that, this is the schedule that we've designed, and I'll take us through it. I will interchangeably use these two. The difference is in a Monday, and I'll explain that in the next slide, is really that the students have 7 periods of instruction, which is asynchronous, but the staff schedule looks a little different, and I'll explain that. But you will see those 2 slides differently. So I'll explain some general aspects of what the in-person hybrid model looks like. And we truly want our students back on campus. We hope that we have a high number of our students coming back because we believe that in-person instruction is the best form of instruction. What we would do is we would split our students in 2 cohorts. Now I say alphabetically, but there are exceptions to that. So what we would like to do is look at some of the classes that are not necessarily need to be split up or should be split up. So some of our classes that are specialty courses, like some ensemble classes, or we have multi-level classes or combination classes, that we would actually look at those and how we can work through those. So not all students will be split up alphabetically. So I want to put a little asterisk to that. But we would split them up into even cohorts so that the class size or cohort sizes are evenly split in each period. Then cohorts attend school on campus on alternating days. So there are certain models out there where students attend 2 days in a row and then they're off for a couple of days. We felt a little more strongly that there is a consistency on, like, I attend one day and then I'm at home one day and then I come back to school. So it's an alternating day as opposed to giving students 5 days in a row of being at home. And we felt that there was a stronger connection to the campus. Mondays would remain largely as what they are right now, where students virtually meet in a cohort academy and they are followed by asynchronous instruction. We do want to work on some structure with regards to some of that asynchronous instruction. We have heard of some extremes from our students of input of how hard that day is, or it's not so hard. So we want to work on some structures within that day, but it would be largely what it is right now. And then Tuesday through Friday are truly days that the student is either virtually or on campus, but it's a little bit of a different virtual instruction than what they're used to right now. So while I call it synchronous, it's a little different than what it is synchronously right now. So, and what that means is that both cohorts truly begin each period together. So if I'm in first period, I'm in cohort and I'm teaching cohort A and I'm teaching cohort B. My cohort A is in front of me and my cohort B is at home. I will start both cohorts together. And then we'll be really up to a teacher, depending on that lesson plan, of what happens for the remainder of that period. I may have a lesson plan as a science teacher that I'm doing a lab. And what we have heard, for example, happening in a successful science lab is that I will start a class together. I will go through some warm-up problems. I'll go through the agenda, and then I will have my at-home cohort go through some activities on their own while I do an in-person lab with my in-person cohort. And then the following day, they will flip-flop. I was trying to use a better term than that. And then, or I could use that time to do it differently. Maybe I need to I want to keep my 2 cohorts together longer because I want to provide them a direct instruction. And maybe I want to keep them in there for 30 minutes together because I want to give them a direct instruction or hold a discussion together when they're both interacting, as opposed to sending one cohort off. So it's really dependent on the teacher. If I'm teaching on a field, I may not have my class with me. Maybe I'm giving them more of an independent time, the students that are at home, versus them zooming in and watching what I'm doing in person. So it just depends on a subject matter of how long that time is. But the important thing is that you're really starting every single period together. So it is not that you have 3 asynchronous Mondays like they are right now. You're starting every period together with your teachers, and then it's dependent on what happens on the subject matter or what happens in that class based on the teacher discretion of how that class is structured. The lunch and the academy would be in person. And it will be staggered. So that's how that schedule is set up. So half of the students are, for example, in person on campus. So cohort A is on campus on Tuesday. We will further divide them during lunchtime and academy. So half of those in-person students will be assigned to Academy 1 and Lunch 2. So they would attend Academy during the earlier time, and then after Academy, they go to lunch, while the other half is doing the opposite schedule. That would allow fewer students during Academy time, which will allow teachers to have fewer students in their academy to do individualized support and intervention. And it will allow fewer students, which is really less than a quarter of our students, on campus at lunch, which is much easier for us to supervise and make sure that they are physically distanced. We do have additional campus supervisors starting in January as well to ensure that physical distancing is happening and support our administrators with that. More stuff, our staff will be provided with time for staff meetings and professional development, optional collaboration, preparation time on Mondays. The block periods are 75 minutes to allow for that in-person academy and passing periods so that we can make sure that the flow of the campus is happening appropriately. Each day begins at 8:30, and then schools will provide flexible spaces for those students who need quiet time to work during their remote days. And then staff will utilize known technology throughout the day, meaning we're not introducing brand new different cameras or new technology that we haven't used before. We will be using Zoom still, and then classroom iPads that will be provided, or any webcams like we're using right now that are already available or there. So there will be no new technology. We still will provide staff who are not familiar with training, and I'll talk about that a little later in the presentation. There are really dark blue spots that are cohort C support in there that is dedicated for students in remote learning only, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. Additional aspect here is our immunocompromised staff members. We do have a group of staff members who may not come back on campus when there's in-person due to their own medical conditions. So for those staff members that Amy McNamara is working with verified medical conditions that are immunocompromised, what we're working with is to allow them to live stream into the classrooms, as opposed to what you heard one of our board members, student board members say, is having a long-term substitute. So what we would allow is our staff member to live stream into the classroom, and while we have a substitute, help with the in-person supervision. So they would continue with the same teacher and the same preparation while there's somebody in the classroom facilitating those in-person activities. And then we have proposed changes as well for the option for the students who are not able to come back. And again, I want to reiterate that we truly hope that our students are coming back on campus, because that is our motto. If our schools are open, we value the in-person instruction. We, while our small groups have been small on campus, what we have seen even in just the small groups in the academic support is some tremendous gains in learning for those students, and a lot of quantifiable and unquantifiable data of how well the things are going when the students are back on campus. There is a group of students who is not able to come back for their own medical reasons or reasons in their households. So we want to make sure that we offer that option for them. So those students that are opting out of the in-person learning, we have the fully remote option. And we want to refer to them as cohort C. And instead of removing those students to a third-party vendor or Fuel Education, what we are proposing is that they stay within our schedule. So there would be no schedule changes to our teachers or our students. They would be actually grouped to one of the other cohorts. On Mondays, they all follow the same schedule because everybody's asynchronous. And then during the Tuesday through Wednesday, that cohort C will follow one of the other cohorts. So if I am a fully remote student and I am together with cohort A, because that Tuesday is my in-person day, I will be live streaming into the classroom. That experience is different because I'm not in person. We know that there are some limiting factors there, but I'll be able to watch what's happening in there. So if I'm in a science lab, there will be that live streaming iPad that I can see what that lab is. I will be able to in some way participate in what's going on, or at least live stream into that discussion. On the other 2 days, for example, in this case, it would be I guess Wednesday, Friday, when my cohort is at home, I will be doing exact same thing as what that cohort is doing, which is the fully remote, which is I'm coming into the classroom at the start of the period, and I'm doing whatever my cohort is doing at home. So it's really on the 2 in-person days that I'm live streaming in. And then if you remember on that last slide, those dark 3 spots, we're providing our teachers with an option to provide specific office hours through one of these time spots for the cohort C. So because they're not coming in during in-person academy, they don't have the opportunity to participate in the academy. We want to make sure that we have those office hours for them where they can come in and get virtually support from their teachers during one of those times when the teacher's offering those office hours. So kind of in general, with regards to our instructional models, we feel like they are aligned to the established guidelines. Every model, we have looked at so many different schedules, and we've prototyped different schedules from all sorts of the extremes. We've looked at the AM, PM models. We've looked at the different 4x4 blocks. We've looked at different types of weeks on, weeks off, month on, month off, all sorts of different combinations of models. And when you come look at our guiding values, there's such a give and take and a compromise. Anytime that we feel like we're 100% aligned or really strongly aligned with a certain guiding value, like maximizing instructional minutes, something else has to give. Or you align to another value, something else has to give. So we feel like what we have just come up with aligns the most. So that's really why we're proposing this. What we feel like is that the in-person and the fully remote models allow for students and staff to keep their existing schedules, and it minimizes the disruption. The recommended schedule also allows the flexibility to the required quarantines rules and potential students or staff absences to be able to live stream in and not miss out on that learning or teaching. Now, I have to emphasize that the schedule does present challenges, not just for our students, but also for our teachers. It is not an easy task. It is a lot to ask to manage 3 cohorts at the same time. It's a lot. You can't provide the same exact level of high rigorous instruction to all 3 cohorts. We do feel like there's a really strong value of bringing students back on campus. So we do think that this is really worth it, of reopening schools and bringing them back in. But it is a lot of management of the 3, and we're going to provide our staff with support. But it's a challenge. It is a significant change mid-year. So I want to talk a little bit about how we want to support during the shifting of a calendar a little bit. And it's an undertaking relating to curriculum planning, our technology training, and the implementation. So with that, some next steps, what we need is immediately our declarations from our community, from our parents, child by child, if their students are coming back to hybrid, or are they opting out due to their needs and staying in fully remote. And our hybrid is meaning that our students are coming back and learning on campus with that model, or are they staying in those full remote classes? Our plan was that they are actually making declarations that are effective through the end of the 2021 school year. However, we know that that's a really big decision. So we do want to give a little bit of wiggle time just right at the start. How we do at the start of the school year is that just allowed within the first few days that the students can come into the classroom. So if I were to see the classroom, I think it's safe and we can do this, that we can come in and opt into the in-person. Or if I've started the classroom and I can opt out. So we do have a little bit of a wiggle room for some minimal changes to the schedule. This was our proposed timeline based on if we were to reopen January 5th. And I want to talk a little about those reopening dates. Clearly, there's that board meeting that we're in currently. We're planning on sending declarations to our community tomorrow, by the end of the day tomorrow afternoon, which is asking our community members or parents intent to return. And we would give them a deadline from tomorrow to December 2nd. And the reason we need to do that right now is because we need to start scheduling to our facilities, our classes. We need to see how many students, and we need to start moving them into the cohorts. We want to make sure that our parents truly understand and our students what they're signing up for. So along with the declarations, we'll send out, short videos and screencasts explaining the schedule, FAQ or frequently asked questions, directions on what the schedule means so they understand truly what they're signing up for. And then we will host a series of meetings, parent forums where they can ask questions. We'll have a district-wide parent forum on the 30th, which is the Monday after Thanksgiving break. And then our school sites will host the parent meetings. I put in there 11:30 and December 2nd, but I know that some of our principals are actually hosting some of the already parent leadership meetings over the next couple of days and wider parent meetings. And I know they've been advertising those at the sites. Once we get that data, that first week of December, really the following 2 weeks is our student scheduling into the cohorts. And then before the winter break, it is we would be able to have our teachers understand who their cohorts are and our students. And then that was, like I said, based on our January 5th model is when we would start to schedule. Now, with all of that said, and circling back to Dr. Nickerson's start of this presentation, we've all been concerned with the rise in COVID numbers. As staff members, I know our parent communities expressed increasing concerns, and we've been monitoring the public health data. We're constantly following the California Department of Public Health guidances. And I know Dr. Nickerson works very closely with our local public health officers to make sure that when we go to the in-person full hybrid model, then we can truly do it safely. So with the increases as numbers, what we would like to recommend is an adjustment to the timeline that I just showed, just the end of it. We would still like to send out the declarations tomorrow and start the master scheduling process. But what we would like to recommend is that we actually reopen for in-person instruction when we are in red tier, and that's and not I, but we determine what we want to make sure is that our students are safe, that our staff is safe, and then we follow the guidelines with regards to the red opening. So we would still need to know how many of our students are coming back, and on those commitment letters we would actually place of the timeline of when we're coming back. So if the governing board said no, we're coming back on January 5th, that's what the declaration would say. If we were allowed to go with the recommendation of coming back in red tier, our declaration would say that we would reopen and that they're declaring to come back when it's in red tier. And then what we are doing is, as I mentioned at the start of when I was talking about it, is that we've been getting ready for reopening. We have our facilities ready over the next month. We have our staffing we're adjusting our staffing right now, and we're working on our master schedules prior to the winter break. So what we want to do is be ready to start January 5th, even though if there's a delay with regards to the purple or the red tier. So what we want to be is ready to shift and pivot as quickly as possible next semester, whenever that time is when the data shifts and it's safe to reopen. And with that, talking about the support for our staff and circling back a little bit of what a challenge this is with regards to the curricular and instructional shift. And part of the adjustment to the calendar is that we would like to talk a little bit about the adjustment of the instructional calendar. We have a professional development day already scheduled in March. and we have a non-instructional day scheduled in February, that we would like to say that we would like to shift those a little bit when we are needing them, which is prior to implementation of the hybrid model. When we started distance learning in the fall, during the summertime, we were able to have professional development days. We had summer institute days. And if we start our hybrid model at some point during the second semester, we just don't have those days right then and there. So we would propose that maybe we can work with our teacher leadership on how we can shift and adjust that instructional calendar. And then also when we start shifting into the in-person, regardless of the start of the time, that there would be a brief time when we would actually start bringing our students on campus for in-person orientation during some asynchronous learning, and to train them on safety protocols and so on. So there will be a little bit of an adjustment in the schedule during a week or 2 week period of time. So our next steps is that we want to continue progression of our in-person learning through our small groups. And we don't want to close down our small groups that are moving on safely and continuing. So we want to continue expanding our academic support groups. We do want to consider, I know we were talking about limiting what we're doing with regards to social or peer interaction with, how big are our sizes of our groups and what are we doing, making sure that we're safe within the purple level, but making sure that we're expanding our academic support. We're working on finalizing our classroom school preparation for our all of our facilities. We definitely, like I said, we need to do all of our final family commitments for hybrid and for remote or distance learning models. We're working on our master schedules in December. We will be implementing the community compact as we finalize our school site and classroom safety protocols and procedures. And then we'll be monitoring and continue to monitor our public health data and following our guidances as we recommend that we reopen when it's safe to do so and the county reaches the red tier. So with that, I'll kick it back to Dr. Nickerson.
Okay, just a couple of additional considerations as we move forward, or just some information for review for the board that we talked about last time and for the public to see. The school safety procedures and protocols are such a big part of this and our preparation to make sure and ensure our school sites are safe as we invite the students back for the hybrid learning. Again, as Ms. Glimmy said, in-person learning is what we do so well. We've gotten pretty good at distance learning, but we know that most students will learn best in person, and we want to see all of our students feeling comfortable and safe to do that. Recognizing that certain families have particular issues that they need their student to stay home, or a particular student might have a health condition where they need to stay home. So our safety procedures and protocols, we went through that in quite detail 2 weeks ago, and there's just some resources there. And just as a reminder, students with symptoms, COVID-19 symptoms, and staff members need to stay home, whether it's identified during the school day or it's before they come in. And we're using a pre-screening program called Company Nurse, and we demonstrated at the last meeting. And that's something that all staff and students will be expected to do prior to coming to school each day to make sure that they're symptom-free. We have protocol when there's positive cases and the amount of time that students will need to stay home. We know it's not if we have positive cases, we know we will have positive cases. We currently have staff member with positive cases, and we have students in our community with positive cases. We know it will happen, and they will be on quarantine and not allowed in school. One of the nice things about this model is it will allow them, if they're on quarantine, and particularly if they're asymptomatic, they'll be able to stream into the classroom and stay caught up. We'll have a robust contact tracing program and identifying contacts of any positive cases. And again, those staff members, those students will be asked to be on quarantine. We'll also be implementing a testing program. We'll be working on weekly testing for all staff, and we'll be working on it in December. And then starting January 5th, all staff members will be, who are on campus, will be participating in the testing program. We are not offering the weekly testing for students, although we will be encouraging students to do frequent testing, and we are working to organize some events where students or family members, community members can come and do testing at some of our school sites. The commitment we expect from the students and staff in order to do this safely is outlined in our community compact, which we reviewed at a couple of board meetings. And that's something that we'll expect all staff members, as well as all students who are on campus, to sign in agreement. And it's a commitment to the behaviors that we know will keep our community safe. Certainly the masking, the physical distancing, and also a commitment to not be in large gatherings and congregations, parties, things of that nature. We know with the winter holiday season, it's important that we as a community step up and do the right thing for our own health and for the health of our families and for the health of the community. And we each have a part in getting the county data down to the red, and it will help us get our kids in school sooner. So we do encourage, I know we have many hundreds or several hundreds of folks listening in, and we ask that you do the right thing as a family and require your students to do the right thing and stay safe and help slow the spread of the coronavirus, particularly during this time of the holiday season. The last thing I'm putting, just because it's such a big consideration of so many of our families right now, is a sports update. We've said before, and I reiterate, right now, the guidance from the California Department of Public Health and from the Contra Costa Health Services does not allow competitive sports, regardless that CIF and NCF have a schedule to start fall sports on December 7th. We've been hoping for a revision to the guidance that would allow some sports or some activities. We anticipate if it should come, it will be based on the tiers. In the purple tier, we don't expect much to be allowed, probably just conditioning in cohorts. As we get to red, then orange and yellow, there will be more allowed. But as of now, there is no competitive sports, no competitions are allowed. We heard on Monday that they postponed a release of a revision to the guidance. We think part of it is because it wasn't appropriate in the midst of a surge. We don't know when it will be released. But until it's released right now, the answer is there is no competitive sports. We know how important sports are to so many of our students. We have well over 60% of our students participate in sports in our schools. And we know that those that participate, it is a big part of their high school experience. It provides opportunities for development that's in a positive way. We want to see it happen, but it has to be done safely and it has to be within the guidance provided by the state. So we know that uncertainty is really tough for our students, but we will release information as we have it. But being realistic, I think any sports happening in December is highly improbable. Happening in January is probably not likely. After that, perhaps. Will there be another adjustment to the schedules? Perhaps. We want to see kids playing sports if it can be done safely. But as of now, it is not allowed. So we just want to kind of reiterate that point, but we will communicate as soon as we know more. And I believe that is the last of our slides, Ms. Kanzerski. So if you want to proceed from there.
Thank you very much. At this point, I'm going to ask if there are any clarifying questions from the board, after which I will go to public comment. So just for those listening, if you want to make a public comment, make sure you go to the board agenda, to the public comment item 4.01 and enter that, because once we finish our questions, we will close public comment so that we can go ahead and hear from you. Okay, so clarifying questions. Ms. Connolly?
Dr. Nickerson, if I could just impose on you to actually just get a more specific on what you mean to the community members that are listening about doing the right thing to help us open up, because that might mean different things to different people. So in terms of what, because we know we have teed up this community compact and we're trying to be really explicit about that. But if you could just elaborate about what you think our expectations should be.
Yeah, so we know when people go out beyond their family unit, they need to wear a mask. We know that when they are around other people, they need to stay physically distanced beyond 6 feet. I will tell you that my observations in this community compared to some other communities I've been in, I don't think we're great about that. And I think we can get better. I think it's critically important that we don't go to large congregations where we are not able to physically distance. And if we do, we need to keep our masks on. We hear far too many reports of people gathering. I think if we feel symptoms, we aren't feeling well, we must not go out. This is not pushing through the flu. This is not pushing through a cold. We need to stay home and seek medical guidance. We need to participate in the surveillance testing. We need to go out and get tested. For one reason, we might catch ourselves as a positive, asymptomatic positive, and we won't pass it on if we are able to isolate very quickly. And two, it helps our testing data and our adjustment in the county. I think it's important during the holidays in particular that we're very careful in our behavior. We keep our congregations very small. So I think that the kind of common sense things we need to do, and I know we all experience the kind of exhaustion, but we need to push through. The vaccine's not here today. We can hope for it to be widespread in the late spring, but that might be unrealistic as well. We need to watch our own behavior. So I know everybody on this call knows what the right things to do, and we'll continue pushing that out. We'll continue to try to improve the education with our students as they come into the community.
Thank you.
Mr. Hockett? Oh, we still see you. Just so you know. You're muted.
Oh, I can't go to someone else.
Okay, Mr. Nibley.
Thank you. So this was for Ms. Glimmy. I think this schedule is actually brilliant. I love having witnessed the evolution from how we started to getting to this point, because I think it's really great. But the one part I didn't totally understand was the academy situation. Could you review that for me and maybe for any parents who didn't totally get that?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Preston. So offered every day, and but really only for those that are in person, right? So if you, Preston, are in cohort A, you were on campus twice a week, and you can attend that academy twice a week, right? So you are assigned, for example, in Academy 1, you are either going to be tagged or can schedule yourself into an academy. Everybody has to be pre-scheduled. We can't have people wandering around, right? Because we have to have limited spaces. And then you would have lunchtime the next time. And then what we would do is stagger. Then the next day you're on campus, you'll have the other half of the staff available to you for the in-person academy to attend during that time. But your schedule would be early academy, or the other cohort, half of the cohort would have the late academy. I don't know, did I explain that?
You did, and
Okay.
you know, of course, because this is just the way things go. My Zoom cut out about halfway through explanation, so I got most of it. But the one part would be: is there also a virtual component for the staff that are not going to be included, because it is every day? So is that a virtual option for?
You mean for the staff that's live streaming in?
Or
for the
them
students
too.
that are not
Yeah,
there?
for the students who are not there, and then also for the staff that are not available, because you made it sound like that would be divided into
Yeah, for the
two
staff,
cohorts of staff.
right. So what we need to figure out is if our students are switching the academy time. So if you're going to have one day of early academy and the other day is late academy, because we want to make sure that on one day of your academy, because if the staff is split up as well, you want to make sure that you don't just have access to half of the teachers, right? So we would rotate which teachers do you have on the other day, right? And you can do that either by having your students rotate the lunch period or your staff, right? So if I'm teaching science, on Tuesdays, my lunch would be in the early time, and on Thursday, my lunch would be at the late time. And that's probably the easiest flip. So that way students have access to all of their teachers, and our teachers would be staggered by department, because you usually have, I know you can take a couple of sciences here and there, but for the most part, you're taking one class within a department, so that we would be keeping the departments together. The teachers that are teaching that are allowed to live stream in would have to do their virtual academy. So you could go to academy and you see them via Zoom. I mean, that's just how it would have to work. The cohort C that is not coming in person, that's why we're offering those additional times for them as the drop-in office hours for them to attend, because they're not on campus to come into the in-person academy. We would still allow, I mean, we want to continue the small groups after school for academic support and so on, even as we go on. So we would allow that for our students that are at home too, if they really need some additional support. But those little office hours that are on those 3 block times would be just specifically for those cohort C students.
So I'm sorry, when students
please
do
go
come
ahead.
on campus, yeah, just this is, I think, maybe one of the more confusing aspects. So if you're in cohort A and you're going on campus for your regularly scheduled classes in a hybrid model, could a student from cohort B go to an academy on a cohort A day?
No, so they're coming in only during their in-person time.
Okay, I see.
Yes, I'm sorry, yeah. We really want to focus the academy during in-person time, because we feel like that's much more valuable, and it's been really utilized, underutilized virtually, and it's been much more effective in person.
Perfect. Thank you for the clarification.
Yep, no, thank you. Good question.
Okay, Mr. Hockett?
Yeah, I just have one quick question for probably Ms. McNamara. How are we in terms of our substitute list?
It's going to be a bit of a challenge. I mean, we have postings right now for subs, and we have hired some new subs. And I'll be sending out another survey to our subs. We had about, I think it's about 40% or 50% of our subs are had no interest in coming back to sub until there was a vaccine, and they go, because we have so many retirees in our sub pool. But we have posted, and since we have hired some subs. So I think we'll know a little bit more probably in the next 2 weeks, as I know how many I need and can match them up. And depending how long a teacher's out, we may need somebody who's fully credentialed. So we would need, you know, a teacher to take over that class ideally. So as we know more about the leaves, I think I'll be able to tell you more about if we're going to have a sub shortage or not. We may need to adjust rates to be competitive. But I think that's a little bit down the road for us.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other clarifying questions from the board? Okay, if not, then we will then move to public comment. So sorry, thank you. I was reflex click. We will close the public comment forum. This time I see that we have 4 people who have are listed for public comment on this item. And let me just remind folks that under Board Bylaw 9323, the board has established 20 minutes for public comment, but comments are limited to not more than 3 minutes. So just know when you're making your public comment to keep it to 3 minutes or less, please. And the following folks, if you could, Dr. Nickerson, if you've enabled, if you could raise your hands so that we can find you in the list of attendees. Rebecca Promessi, and please forgive me if I mispronounce people's names. I've spent my life having people mispronounce, and I guess somehow or other, I seem to be doing the same thing back. Jenny Hill, Wayne Hill, and Rachel McCutcheon. Since we have 4, I'm just going to list all names. If you could raise your hands so that we can find you, and we will start with Rebecca. And when you come on, you can unmute yourself and
all right,
go ahead.
Hello, good evening. My name is Rebecca Promessi, and I am a Living Earth teacher and also the yearbook advisor at Miramani High School. My thanks to the governing board for the opportunity to speak tonight, as well as to the staff members that have worked tirelessly to put together this hybrid model that has been proposed. While I'm extremely appreciative of everyone's efforts in this process, I would like to say for the record that I am 100% opposed to returning to a hybrid model mid-year. My concerns are many. Some of them are related to health and safety issues, especially considering our movement back to the purple tier. Some of them are related to the fact that I have philosophical and pedagogical concerns about switching to a hybrid model mid-year and uprooting our current system and what that means for students as well as for teachers. However, that's actually not the main focus of what I would like to address tonight. What I would like to address is a feeling that has been gnawing at me throughout this process that I've tried to reconcile but has persisted. And in speaking to my fellow colleagues, I have become aware that many of them feel the same. Throughout this process, great care has been taken to ensure that parents and students are given the option as to whether they would like to return to a hybrid model or remain in distance learning, and rightfully so. Parents are being afforded the opportunity to assess their own comfort levels, assess their own students' needs, and what is best for their families overall. However, we as staff members are not being afforded that same courtesy of choice. As a staff member that is opposed to returning to a hybrid model for many reasons, I have 3 options: retire, resign, or take a leave. I'm too young to retire. I am a single parent, so if I resign, I have absolutely no way of supporting myself or my daughter, and I do not qualify for a COVID leave. This means my only option is to return to a hybrid model, which I both disagree with and do not at all feel comfortable in, thus increasing exposure for both myself and my daughter. This causes extreme anxiety and fear for both of us in our household. I understand that this is my job and I am paid to do it, and I'm extremely grateful and appreciative for it. I also understand that every day people are asked to do things in their jobs that they don't agree with or feel comfortable with. Cognitively, I understand that. Emotionally, it feels upsetting. It is upsetting that my daughter and I will have to put our own health, our well-being, our lives even potentially at risk for something that I don't agree with or believe in. I wish the same respect and courtesy of choice being offered to parents were being offered to faculty as well. Choice to decide what is best for our families, for our health, for our safety, and for our emotional and mental well-being. There's a lot more that I'd like to say, but I see that my time is running down. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time, for the opportunity to speak and to express my thoughts and feelings on this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next will be Jenny Hill.
Okay, this is Wayne Hill. I registered it as my wife again.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, we double scheduled. Sorry. So my thoughts are: one, why aren't schools and teachers considered essential? I think this is crazy, and so much of what we're talking about is fear and safety. Is this fear based on the narrative of the media? Let's take a step back. Trump lost. We need to move on with our life. Trump's done, and we can now get back to the facts. The facts are cases are up. What are hospitalizations up in Contra Costa County? There's 67 people. in Contra Costa County in hospitals because of COVID. Out of 1.156 million people, 253 people have died in Contra Costa County because of COVID. 130 of those were in long-term care facilities. The chance of high school age kids dying or even being hospitalized is about 0.0005. What is this fear based on? It's not based on facts. It's not based on data. Mr. Nickerson puts up all the data, everything. Where's the data on hospitalizations? Where's the data on who's dying from this thing? It is not high school age kids. The kids are suffering mental health issues. We talk to parents, they can't get in to see counselors because so many kids are stressed out because they're not in a normal setting. We're saving lives, that's fine. We need to focus on saving livelihoods. It's interesting that your core values include the well-being and social emotional well-being, and it also talks about minimize disruption to the community. I don't know how distance learning does either of those. The social and well-being of the kids is completely compromised by them not being in school, not having access to sports. There are 2 states right now in the country that aren't playing sports. Our wonderful state of California and Illinois, 2 of the most dysfunctional states in the country. It's no surprise. Kids need to be back in school. They need to be back playing sports. No one is going to die of COVID. We take risks every day. We get in cars that don't have any tread on the tires, but that doesn't mean people stop driving. Hundreds of thousands of people die every year from accidental surgeries. Do we shut down hospitals? Do we stop surgeries? No, we go on. We've got to get the mindset that we must move forward, not do more studies. I'm curious as to how many other states in this country have done surveys and focus groups and more surveys. This is taking time and money that we don't have. We could have been back in school 3 weeks ago when we were in the red, but we just waited and did more studies and we were, out of the red. And now it's not going to be until January. And then in January is going to happen. Then something else is going to push it off to February. And this whole nonsense about influenza and COVID overwhelming the US. Look at the data from the Southern Hemisphere that just finished their winter season. 4 countries had 0.0006% test positive for influenza. The normal rate is 13%. That's more than 2,000% less than normal. So that's not true. We need to start looking at the facts and get the fear out of it and forget the media narrative. Kids need to be in school. They need the opportunity to socialize. Kids are going out on the weekends. Every kid is. They're not wearing masks. That's not good. I agree with Dr. Nickerson, but they're not dying. They're not getting hospital. If they get COVID, they have a cold. They're better. We need to get out and get back into school. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh my God.
Next is Rachel McCutcheon.
Hi. I didn't prepare a statement. I just kind of decided at the last minute that I wanted to speak. I'm so appreciative of all the efforts that everyone has put towards these schedules. I know you guys have worked really hard and I'm very appreciative of it. I'm also appreciative of the student from Miramonte who spoke up about her concerns about transitioning to the hybrid remote instruction, and also to Rebecca, the teacher who spoke a little while ago. I am also a teacher. I work in the San Ramon district, and I share many of the concerns that Rebecca stated. If one of your core values is delivering a high level of instruction, how is reducing teacher instruction by 50% going to be good for our students? You guys gave a survey to the parents, and at that time, the remote option was for fuel ed, but now that's changed. You're not offering fuel ed. You're going to allow the students to live stream. I'm wondering what's going to happen when the parents have to put in their declaration now that that's been changed. In San Ramon District, 70% of the secondary students, families elected to be remote. And so I'm wondering if those numbers come back, are you going to consider, if there's a lot of families that still want remote, would you consider having a more robust remote program besides reducing it to 50%? My daughter's been doing a great job so far in what we've had, and I really am very concerned about reducing the time of her instruction. And I just wonder if we come back with a lot of people who still want remote and are concerned and share the concerns that many of the other people have stated about the numbers going up. I just wonder if you guys are going to reconsider having a more robust remote program. And that's, I don't have anything else to say. Thank you.
Thank you. And just checking with you, Dr. Nickerson, that I believe completes public comment. Thank you. So I will bring it back to the board then for discussion. Do I have anyone who has additional things, or do we want to move to a motion? Mr. Nibley?
Sure, I'll kind of start the discussion. The very first thing I thought about just before I really got into the details of the schedule that was proposed was what Dr. Severson said, I think about a month ago, which was the precedent that we were setting by not reopening in the middle of the semester and instead waiting for the beginning of the second semester. And frankly, now it looks like, because we're in the purple tier, that it's unlikely that we'll be back in that red by January 5th. And that's perfectly fine. So what I'm really happy about with this schedule that's been proposed is that we actually have a way, it seems like, transitioning from a distance model, all distance, where both all cohorts A, B, and C are doing remote learning, to a hybrid model. So I think that's one of the great advantages of what's been proposed, because we're not pre-segregating along fuel ed and the Akalani's model of education. Now that we're keeping everybody in that one pool, that seems very convenient. The other thing was what Ms. McCutcheon said. She mentioned the conflicting core values, and I guess I would expand on what Ms. Glimmy said as a response, which is that any combination of models is going to have a different emphasis on those core values. And I think the decision that the board is coming to, and what Mr. Hockett brought up several meetings ago, was that we've kind of made a decision implicitly, which is that we're willing to take a sacrifice to those instructional minutes if we're going to help get kids back in the classroom, so that we help facilitate wellness and mental health. So there's a balance to be had, and that's really the discussion. But no one model is going to result in the perfect distribution of those core values.
Thank you. Mr. Hockett?
Yeah, I'll just say a few things. First of all, board member Coppersmith and myself had a chance to visit 3 of our sites about 3 weeks ago: Las Lomas, Campo Lindo, and Acalanes. And then the entire board had the opportunity on last Friday to go to Miramonte, and this morning to go to Campo Lindo. And it is absolutely amazing the work that our classified staff have put in to prepare our campuses, our classrooms. It's just amazing. I just want to really give a shout out to all the maintenance, grounds crew, everybody who's worked so hard to get our schools, our classrooms prepared. And also our teachers. Distance learning has been so much more improved than what it was last quarter, or excuse me, the last quarter of last school year. And now in the hybrid model, obviously it's another system we're going to, and they're going to actually have 2 or 3 cohorts, depending upon how you want to define it. That's going to be a heavy lift. I think it's good we're doing it that way, because I think many parents who wanted to remain distance learning wanted, live stream, which we're going to do, which I think is good for students, and it's going to be a heavy lift for our teachers. But I think most of our teachers realize it's going to be good for students. And our site and district administration just put a tremendous amount of work into this. I think this is a good plan. It's not perfect. Usually we're making decisions prior to COVID-19. It was getting input, getting information, and then making the best decision we could. Sometimes I feel like now we're getting input, getting knowledge, and making the least worst decision. But I think this is a good plan. It gives opportunity for those who want in-class instruction, and it gives quality and equitable education for those who choose to remain in distance learning. And so, again, I support this plan. I think the timeline is good. I think now we have, the uncertainty is really pretty much over from our standpoint. The issue is, of course, once we get into red, but hopefully that'll be shortly. So I'll support this plan. Thank you.
Others, Dr. Severson?
Yeah, thanks. So I am, first of all, I want to say I'm grateful for, all the professionals that in the district that have really put in a lot of time and have been really creative with aligning values and keeping student education at the forefront. I'm also grateful for all of the community input, mostly parents and students, that we've gotten with lots of different ideas. I know Ms. Glimmy has seen especially a lot of, probably 1,000 different ideas that have come across her desk, but some we've been able to synthesize in, and some haven't worked, but those ideas have been really important. I'm pleased with this hybrid version 2.0. Maybe it's version 35.0, but at least it's 2.0 that's come to us for approval. I think I wish that that we've been able to be in hybrid learning this fall, I perhaps we would have arrived to the same model as we learned from our hybrid experience this fall. But I think we're going to be entering the second semester with a better model than we would have started in August, and so I'm pleased with that and pleased with all the work that that's gone on. I do want to reiterate what Preston touched on a second ago, that I think this model gives us much more flexibility than our other model did for both the for moving in and out of the models, or moving students in and out, and if our levels change. Sorry, I was just hearing a little bit of echoing. So I'm grateful for everything that's been going on here. So I don't have any other particular questions.
Okay, Ms. Connolly.
Thank you. So just building on some of the comments from my colleagues, I do want to just acknowledge the work of all the teacher leaders with Ms. Glimmy's leadership on the design process, because it is significantly improved. And I really do want to highlight the change to the distance learning option. We heard from many, many, many parents and students. Our student reps have been very forthcoming about their ideas, which is different than the past years of what the student reps, they're commenting on our agenda and letting us know. And I really appreciate that. And I want to credit Mr. Nibley for working with the student reps on that. But I do think that the distance learning option, that the live streaming piece of that is incredibly important. And I think that we are providing a significant improvement to where we were before. And so, and I'm really inclined, we have heard loud and clear that while the distance learning is better than it was in the spring, there are still many students that have struggled with it, and bringing them back in small groups has been great, but really we need to be ready to take it to that next level. So I'm incredibly, it's taken, being on campus. I wasn't able to go to Campo this morning, but being on campus at Miramani on Friday and being able to meet with Ms. Parks, the principal, and the admin team, and to see the changes and to see the extent to which the COVID safety teams on campus are thinking about the placement of every single desk, and that every single classroom will have a list of capacity that is allowed in that classroom. And we are thinking about all the safety procedures. I'm very grateful for all the work that's going into it. And I do want to acknowledge there is frustration for families about what's still hard, and that CIF and NCS haven't been able to pull off sports. That's really impactful for such a significant percentage of our students, as Dr. Nickerson was speaking earlier. And that's unfortunate. But this global pandemic is really, really hard, and it's affecting people on so many different levels. And I'm just grateful that the district leaders and the school leaders, both the classified and certificated staff, are digging deep to really meeting the challenges that we're seeing. And so I do really look forward to being able to launch the survey to get the commitments from families about what this looks like, so that we can be ready. I am hopeful that the communities across the county will do the right thing and help us bring the numbers down so that we can be in the red tier sooner rather than later. Work collaboratively to keep our teachers and students safe and to be on campus. I did have just one, I should have asked this earlier, Dr. Nickerson or Ms. Glimmy. I'm not sure if you have an answer to this question, but what percentage of students have continued to consistently not engage in distance learning? Sort of the distance learning kind of true, because one of the reasons we're doing this is to bring students back on campus to engage with them. And I'm just trying to, I didn't know if you had a ballpark or an estimate.
Well, what do you mean by not engage?
Well, I know that attendance has been up, right? And so is it a very small number of just students that really haven't?
Our attendance means that you log into Zoom.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean your camera, your name is there.
Mm-hmm.
We monitor engagement also through how much work you're doing through Canvas.
Mm-hmm.
It's lower than attendance.
Mm-hmm.
And then really what's our main monitoring is their academic progress through grades. Mm-hmm. And we know that initially we saw many more students struggle than they have.
Right, a lot more D's and F's. Yeah.
Then things improved. And then we'll be monitoring what happens at the semester. What we're seeing more is a divide. Those that are doing well and the A's and B's, they're doing well. And those numbers are there. It's almost a disappearance of sort of the middle.
Mm.
That's what's dropped down into the D's and F's. I'm not saying that there are no students getting C's. They're out there. But that's really where it's the divide.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where our biggest concern is.
Mm-hmm.
That's the concrete sort of the grade-based data.
Mm-hmm.
How many students are actually doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
That's reflected in the academic progress. There are a lot of things that are not so tangibly quantified in the data that are in that mental health.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ms. Parks introduced us to this concept that there's a lot of ceilings on the Zoom. I don't know if Mr. Nibley can comment about if he has that experience of a lot of students just showing the ceiling instead of themselves on camera. Because we did Zoom into some classes at Miramani on Friday. And
right.
So, but there's students are going through a lot, and it's important to bring them back to campus. So no, I appreciate your comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Coppersmith? You need to unmute.
My apologies. Fully understanding we can't meet the needs of every staff person, every family in our community and do what they would like best. I think the reality of it is we've come up with our professional educators have come up with an excellent plan to move us forward as much as the county will allow. And the decision to wait until we're in red is one as a health issue. And because there are many more people involved than the students themselves getting ill, including our adult teachers, including other staff on campus, including people they're bringing their asymptomatic home to. So I think being very grateful for the tremendous amount of work that's gone into this plan. I feel like it is time to deliver this to the community, and the communication's already been out there. And I think we will get the students back to school as soon as it's possible. So whenever you're ready, I would be happy to make a motion.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Let me just add a couple of things. One, I definitely want to thank everyone, our classified staff, for doing so much prep in order to make our schools ready for people to come back. The working group to work through the model, because I think that the changes have made a very definite improvement in the model. In particular, I really want to thank you for bringing back Academy and splitting it very strategically to both improve, a tricky thing, which is lunch during COVID, as well as limiting the number of students in Academy in order to have really focused intervention and interaction. Because I think that that's one of the areas that I think that we can really make progress on, essentially recovering from any of the learning loss. And I'm really glad to see that back in the schedule. I really appreciate that. And I want to echo what some of my colleagues have said, which is that I think that this is, nothing's perfect. I think it's a very good balance. I'm really appreciative that the working group and our teachers thought very hard about providing an equitable experience for all of our students, regardless of the situation. And I'm really glad to see that we have all cohorts basically in the same education program. I think that's really valuable, and I appreciate very much that it's a heavy lift, like so much else in this pandemic, but I think it's a really, really good place to put the effort, and I think it's really going to pay off. So I want to thank everyone in advance for that effort. Given that, I would at this time entertain a motion to approve the hybrid and distance learning plan.
Thank you. I had one boring procedural question, Ms. Glimmy, which was for cohort C, since they're still going to be integrated in the master schedule, why is it that we're not going to be allowing a transition from C to say A or B in like April, for example, if families are more comfortable? Is that a possibility? Just because it seems like we'd have a lot of flexibility that way, but maybe not.
We were discussing that. What we were discussing in the work group is, and our teacher feedback was that how you assess our students that are completely in distance learning versus how you're assessing the students once they can come in person is a little different. And how some of the assignments will have to be modified, and not all of the assignments may have to be identical, meaning there will be differences in assignments. So as the time goes, there will be a gap, a growing gap. So the further we go along, there will just be a difference in the grading procedures and the progress. So we wanted to make sure not to allow that too far, and bring them and allow that flexibility at the start. But once it's way far down the road, it's too much. So that was really the difference.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm sorry, are there any other questions, comments? Okay, at this time, I will entertain a motion to approve the hybrid and distance learning plan as recommended, which is the model plus the timing of opening when the county gets to red. Do I have a motion? Ms. Connolly?
Kristen Connolly, I move approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Chris Severson, second.
Thank you, Dr. Severson. Mr. Nibley, do you support the motion?
Yes.
Thank you. And Ms. Richmond, please call the roll.
Yes, roll call vote for 8.02, approval of the hybrid distance learning model put forth this evening. Ms. Connolly.
Aye.
Ms. Coppersmith.
Aye.
Mr. Hockett.
Aye.
Dr. Severson.
Aye.
And Ms. Konzerski.
Aye. Thank you.